Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. We're going to get started right away because we unfortunately only have half an hour for this event, so no time to lose. We're going to split it up into two sections. First of all, we're going to be telling you about Amnesty International's report, and then we will take all your questions. So again, welcome to all of you. Thank you for being at the annual launch of Amnesty International's death penalty report for 2016-17. Thank you again, and to special thanks, of course, to the missions of Mongolia and to Argentina for co-hosting this event today. And to kick us off with some opening remarks, it's my great pleasure to introduce the permanent representative of Argentina, Ambassador Marín García Maritain. Please do take the floor.
Well, dear colleagues and friends, I'm honored to participate in this event, which will contribute to raise awareness of the appalling consequences of the use of death penalty worldwide and on the need to take step forwards its abolition. Argentina is firmly committed to the fight against the death penalty, as is reflected in our international actions, including our active participation in the support group for the International Commission Against Death Penalty. For my country, Argentina, it was an honor to co-facilitate last year negotiations together with Mongolia for the adoption of the resolution of the General Assembly on the moratorium on the use of the death penalty. We are two countries coming from different regions of the world, with different cultural backgrounds and different stories in relation with the use of the death penalty. Nevertheless, both our countries are truly convinced on the importance of the moratorium as a tool for allowing those still having the capital punishment to hold informed and transparent national and regional debates guided. In fact, one of the progresses achieved in the resolution last year was to include more language in relation with available data and information needed in order to hold those debates. In our path to move away from the death penalty, we believe it is fundamental to reiterate our call for implementing a worldwide moratorium and encourage informed debates on the consequences of its use. Therefore, it's a pleasure to partner once more with Mongolia in this opportunity to give the chance to Amnesty International to present the results of their annual report on the use of the death penalty and to thank them for their continuous efforts to monitoring of the use of the death penalty all around the world. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ambassador. I'll hand the floor now to my colleague from Amnesty International, our representative at the UN, Renzo Pomi. Renzo.
Thank you, Sherine. Thank you to all for coming again. I also want to thank the missions of Argentina and Mongolia, also to their teams. They have been extremely helpful, in particular Fernando and Ulsi, these days, and for giving us this opportunity to present the report. I wanted to start my presentation by referring to one particular case, the case of this young man who is smiling to the camera on the screen. His name is Nai Shubin. He was wrongfully convicted, and his conviction was overturned by the Supreme People's Court of China on December the 2nd last year, so a few months ago. His execution, however, took place 21 years ago in 1995. This is not the only wrongful conviction referred to in the report we are presenting today. There is, for instance, 80-year-old Tran Van Then, who was found innocent in Vietnam after spending 43 years in death row. So the use of the death penalty has been always marked by arbitrariness, discrimination, and error. The death penalty is cruel, inhuman, and degrading to all those involved in applying it, and violate the right to life enshrined in the Universal Declaration. It should not be difficult to understand why Amnesty opposes death penalty in all cases, without exception, regardless of the nature or circumstances of the crime, guilt or innocence of the accused individual, or the method used by the state to carry out the execution. In spite of the reasons expressed above and others, at least 18,848 people were still under sentence of death worldwide at the end of 2016. In 2016 alone, at least 3,117 people were sentenced to death in 55 countries. Of those who were under death sentence in 2016, at least 1,032 were executed in 23 countries. In terms of the methods of execution, 14 countries employed hanging, 8 countries employed shooting, 3 countries employed lethal injection, and 1 country employs beheading. I'm going to go now through some specifics. Regarding executions, our organization recorded a 37% decrease globally in 2016 as compared to 2015. So there were 602 fewer executions than in 2015, when we recorded the highest number of executions in a single year since 1989. So despite the significant decrease, the overall number of executions in 2016 remained higher than the average recorded for the previous decade. The overall decrease in the number of executions was due mainly to Iran, where executions dropped by 42%, and Pakistan by 73%. Excluding China, 87% of all executions took place in just 4 countries: Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Pakistan. The number of executions recorded in the Middle East and North Africa decreased also by 28% against the previous year, from 1,196 executions in 2015 to 856 in 2016. These numbers of executions does not include the thousands carried out in China, which remains the world's top executioner. However, China's true extent of the use of the death penalty remains unknown, as data on this is classified as state secret. Recent claims of judicial transparency are undermined by the facts. For instance, our investigation exposes that only 85 out of 931 cases of executions that our organization recorded between 2014 and 2016 appear in China's judicial database. So only 85 of the 931. Amnesty International also has found that the database omits cases of foreign nationals given death sentences for drug-related crimes. Numerous cases related to terrorism and other drug-related offenses are also absent from the database. Transparency is an essential safeguard of due process. Ambassador Garcia Moritan already said, and very rightly so, that the availability of data and transparency is essential, not just for knowing the extent of the use of the death penalty, but also for fair process safeguards. The risk of people being executed for crimes they did not commit has already caused increased alarm among the public of China, for instance, as exemplified by the case I mentioned before. However, the lack of the conviction of innocents is, of course, a concern that goes beyond China. The mix of lack of judicial or due process safeguards and the use of the death penalty, in particular the mandatory death penalty, is, of course, toxic and could lead to errors and cannot be remedied. New information for Vietnam revealed that the scale of executions was even higher than previously thought. New transparency also painted a troubling picture in Malaysia. For the first time since 2006, the USA was not one of the 5 biggest executioners. The number, for the 8th consecutive year, the United States was the only country to carry out executions in the Americas region. The number of executions and death sentences recorded in the USA continued to decline, reaching the lowest number recorded in any year since 1991 and 1973, respectively. There were 20 executions and 32 new death sentences in the US in 2016. The decrease in both figures was in part linked to legal challenges that resulted in the revision of lethal injection protocols and problems faced by states in obtaining lethal injection chemicals. Texas and Georgia were responsible for 80% of all executions in the USA during this year. Progress towards abolition or global abolition continued in all regions during 2016. In 2016, 2 countries, Benin and Nauru, abolished the death penalty in law for all crimes. Guinea abolished the punishment for ordinary crimes only. In total, 104 countries have fully abolished the death penalty, a majority of the world's states. Only 64 countries were fully abolitionists in 1997, meaning only 20 years ago. Nowadays, 141 countries worldwide, more than 2/3 of the countries in the world, are abolitionists in law or practice. I would have loved to end this presentation in a positive note. However, I have to refer to the need to keep the fighting on against setbacks. For instance, the Philippines is seeking to reinstate the death penalty, last abolished in 2006, and Maldives is threatening to resume executions after 60 years of not doing so. The United States state of Arkansas has scheduled 8 executions over a 10-day period in April, its first execution since 2005. I invite you to keep on this fight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Renzo, for that explanation. A real mixed bag, so I'm sure you have many questions. So questions for Renzo? Sir, in the back there, go ahead, please.
Thank you for this presentation. My name is Abadi from Le Dossier. Just a point of clarification. What is the stand of Amnesty International regarding terrorists who have been convicted?
Thank you. Well, as I said before, Amnesty International opposes death penalty in all circumstances. So that is irrespective of the crime committed or the circumstances of the crime. So I have to say that in the crime the crime you mentioned, we would be opposed to any country applying the death penalty.
Thank you. Siapak from Scan News. We all know United Nations Foundation is built on human rights. Do you think that it's failing that subject? And if you want to give them marks from 0 to 10, would you mark them to?
Thank you. Well, as you know, the Secretary General has adopted a policy on death penalty that has been in place for many years, and we applaud that policy. The policy is that the UN, or at least the Secretary General, doesn't condone death penalty, doesn't support death penalty, and moreover opposes death penalty. So in that sense, we are happy with the position adopted by the Secretary General. However, the UN is a body of states, and as I said in my presentation, there are still several states upholding the death penalty as a punishment for crime. And in that sense, the outcome, you can say, the appreciation is a mixed bag, as my colleague said. However, we are very supportive of initiatives that countries like Mongolia and Argentina and others present here have of imposing every 2 years resolution on a moratorium on the use of the death penalty, trying to curb the use of the death penalty until we reach a time in which abolition is achieved. So it is hard to judge the UN as an institution because, as I said, there are several countries still using the death penalty. But the Secretariat itself supports a position that is against the death penalty.
Yes, Joseph Klein, Canada Free Press. Just picking up on the earlier question about terrorists. Am I correct in assuming that Amnesty International would oppose in all circumstances the targeting of known terrorists by drones in areas where terrorists are operating, that being sort of an extrajudicial carrying out of the death penalty, if you will? What is Amnesty International's position on that?
Well, these numbers and this information I'm providing today is about judicial executions. So it doesn't cover extrajudicial executions, which of course is something that Amnesty works very much works on and reports on as well. So I'm not in a position to give you a concrete answer on your question, but depending on the circumstances, if the killing of a person is done against international law, we will condemn it as an extrajudicial execution.
Well, just to follow up, though, if Amnesty International is opposed in all circumstances, no matter how heinous the crime, including acts of terrorism, to the application of the death penalty in a judicial setting, are you saying that there may be circumstances outside of the judicial process where the targeting and killing of a terrorist by, let's say, a drone attack is justified in your view, or would you apply the same prohibition across the board?
Well, I didn't say that. I said that my presentation was about judicial executions, and we have a system and a process by which we analyze the application of judicial death sentences applied by the judiciary and executions, and this report is about that particular case. What I said is that if there are cases in which a person, in particular a civilian, is killed, we will analyze the circumstances and report as we think is necessary. In many cases, it could be an extrajudicial execution. In other, I don't know, I cannot work on hypotheses. I'm just reporting on the information I have in front of me. Thanks.
Thank you. Carla Stay, Global Research. What is the justification given by countries, I would say specifically the United States, because that's what, for imposing the death penalty? And secondly, I believe there were some important reports, it might have been by Clarence Darrow some time ago, demonstrating that the execution judicially does not deter crime, and that it actually has no positive effect other than, well, revenge.
Well, I believe that you yourself answered the question. In general, the countries using the death penalty are countries that are proposing a strong stance against crime, and believe that the death penalty could be a tool to deter crime, precisely. We contend that or oppose that view because we don't have any evidence indicating that death penalty is actually a punishment that deter crime more than any other punishment. So that's the answer that we have. In case of the USA, the United States, I guess is a state-by-state system in which most of the decisions are taken at the state level. And again, there might be many reasons why they keep the death penalty, but luckily we have seen a tendency in the US towards the reduction of the use of the death penalty, with several states in the past few years abolishing the death penalty altogether.
What methods are you using to persuade countries to abolish the death penalty? I mean, you must have a whole spectrum of methods of persuading.
Yeah. Well, this is one, making sure that there is a debate ongoing on the death penalty to provide all the information we can, because many cases of the death penalty are either imposed or carried out in secrecy, and we don't think that helps the debate and understand whether the death penalty is actually working. So that's one way. But of course, we are, as you know, we are a membership organization which base its work on research and action. So our members in many countries in the world react to information pertaining to death penalty. And for instance, we have urgent actions trying to raise awareness of the fact that people are going to be executed, oftentimes against international law and standards. So we mobilize our members and we use the media and or we lobby governments directly to try to enter in this conversation, trying to convince them that the use of death penalty is not only against international law, but also it's not working as a punishment.
Much success with that, lobbying governments?
Well, we started many years ago, and as I said in my initial remarks, 20 years ago, only 60-something countries were abolitionists. Nowadays, we have 141 countries who are abolitionists in law and practice. So I'm not taking the credit for this, but with the help of others, like states committed to ending death penalty, we are achieving some results.
John Metzler at WorldTribune.com. Looking at this rather grisly tableau of the various numbers, if we look at a country like Iran, what percentage of those or number of those executed are for political crimes as compared with, for example, criminal issues?
Yeah, that's a very good question. My answer is not going to be too complete, and I invite you to read the report that we are presenting here. But basically, that's one of the problems with many countries reported here. The number of crimes or situations which could end you in a death row are many. Some countries have, like China, 50 plus crimes that are punishable by death. So in the case of Iran, there are several reasons. Robbery, which ends up in death, even drug trafficking. I believe a good percentage of death penalties are applied for drug trafficking. There are some crimes, quote unquote, end quote, which are not maybe wouldn't resist a legal challenge in other places, like enmity against God or blasphemy or things of the like. So it's a series of crimes, and I have to say that the main issue here is that in international law, death penalty is still allowed to happen if it is applied with the proper due process, and it refers only to the most serious crimes. And that is normally crimes that involve the death of the victim of the crime. So all the cases in which countries condemn to death people for drug trafficking or other crimes as the ones I just mentioned are clearly in a contravention of international law.
Thank you. Follow up to my colleague's question on Iran. I think you mentioned death penalty in Iran fallen 40%. What is the reason for that? Is it because there are more working with international communities, or basically there's no criminal left to execute?
Well, the decrease is in the number of executions. We don't have a clear information on the death sentences that have been applied or decided against alleged criminals. So we don't know how many people are in death row. So in terms of the reasons, I don't have with me a clear explanation to give you on why they executed so much less people this past year. But we have to remember that 2015 was a record year in terms of the implementation of the death penalty, in terms of executions. So we basically went back to a normal, which, as you can see, is pretty high. Right? But it's possible that I'm missing something of our own report, and I invite you to check the report when this ends.
For two more quick questions. So there's one here and one there. Go ahead.
Thank you, Charles Whiteley from the EU mission. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned one country that's making steps towards reinstating the death penalty. What's your view of the legality of that, where a state is a party to the second optional protocol?
Mm-hmm. Well, in our view, if the state had committed to abolish the death penalty by ratifying and being a state party to the protocol, if they restarted the application of the death penalty, that would be against its commitments under international law. So that would be one of the reasons why we would oppose that move.
Sure, thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. I wanted to ask you first, I noticed in the report that for South Sudan you have no numbers either for executions or death penalties. It's particularly because there's a UN mission there that is a pretty large mission. Do you think that they should help? I mean, have they collected any of that information? And also I see in your report on Cameroon you say it's 160, but you seem to, in the text, to tie this all to a single military court in Maroa. And since then, there have been a lot of death penalty trials about people from the Anglophone areas. There's, in fact, a former UN legal advisor, Felix Agbor-Bala, facing the death penalty in a trial. So I'm just wondering, is that something that Amnesty International is covering, the increased use of the death penalty, basically to try, in this case, a lawyer for saying that there should be a common law system in his part of the country?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question, the two questions. On South Sudan, yes, there are several countries in which we just put a plus sign because we know that executions have happened or death sentences have been applied, but we cannot give you a concrete number for that. So the information on South Sudan is very sketchy. We cannot say how many there are. You are right, there is a big mission, UNMISS, there, and they have a human rights component, and linking this with the UN policy or the Secretary General's policy against the death penalty, it would be certainly useful if the mission would have more information about this issue. In the case of Cameroon, I feel like you are more informed than I am in terms of the situation in Cameroon. You are right that there is one particular military court sentencing many people to death. We are concerned about the legality of the sentences and the respect for due process safeguards. So we are following that closely, but unfortunately I don't have any other information more than what it is in the report. Thank you.
I'm so sorry we're about to be thrown out by the PGA, but I'll tell you what, we can also talk outside, and there are various reports right there on the table by the door, so please pick one up in various languages. And again, thank you so much, all of you, for being here.